Every day, people around the world face challenges that can seem insurmountable. Hunger, poverty, inequality, pain, and so much more. In Western nations, the crypto world is often identified through greed and decadence. There is a better way. Introducing Carbon 12, a better way to create real-world impact and collective action while celebrating individual growth. C12 is focused on making a difference on people and societies around the world, partnering with organizations and initiatives that are creating real change in communities. C12 fosters financial freedom for the individual and positive impact around them. Take control of your freedom and invest in the world around you in 3 simple steps. Purchase C12 at carbon12.co and use it for transactions to buy or sell things that are contributing to a positive impact. Achieve independent financial freedom through staking, compound interest, dividends, DAO rewards, and more on our How to Buy page. Join a global movement making a difference through the transparent impact ecosystem. C12. Individual and collective impact made transparent. Join the C12 revolution today.
All right, this is one of those shows where we have a lawyer in the audience. So
Two.
Two. That's true.
We have one at the table, too.
One at the table, too. Yeah. So we got to be careful, but we aren't going to be, okay? Because this is cross-politic, and it's Pastor Toby, it's Chalk Knox, and I'm the water boy, and this is not how it goes. So don't sue us.
We might have 2 lawyers, but we're still like in a Christian pub, so
Right.
the environment's
Beer
beer
has been served.
And there's 3 of us and only 2 of them.
We don't have any beers here.
It's Friday.
Scotch.
There's coffee. It's coffee flowing.
Yeah, I want some bourbon or something.
I'll do that in a minute.
Jesus is Lord in public and in private and in every area of life. It must be subject to his lordship, and our use of technology is no exception. What captures our attention on the screen either glorifies or dishonors our Lord. That's why Accountable to You is committed to promoting biblical accountability in our families and churches. Their monitoring and reporting software makes transparency easy on all your devices, so you can say with the psalmist, I will not set anything worthless before my eyes. Guard against temptation with Accountable to You. It's the word accountable, the number 2, and the word you, and live for God's glory. Learn more and try it for free today at accountable2you.com, and you can put /FLF on there. Let them know we sent you.
That's right.
We're really grateful to have with us at the table Mr. Timon Cline. He's an attorney practicing in New Jersey and a fellow at the Craig Center at Westminster Theological Seminary. He's also editor of American Reformer, and he's written a bazillion articles.
Yes, he is.
Timon, thanks for joining us on Cross Politics.
Thanks for having me.
What's the background of your name?
Oh,
Timon.
Jeff just asked me that this morning.
Yeah.
So it's in Acts 6. It's the list of deacons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's a Bible name.
It's a Bible name.
Wow. I missed that one.
Yeah. Timon, in addition to your name, the thing that I actually want to know is,
In addition to your name. Toby didn't care about that question. He's moving on. He's like, Gabe, you're boring.
if there was, I don't know, 2 or 3 specific things about the history and sort of founding of America that you think the run-of-the-mill American Christian has never heard of, doesn't know this, because they went to public schools, because they all they had was a Becca history, and I mean that's pretty good, but whatever. But these are 2 or 3 things you think would change the way they think about our country.
2 or 3.
2 or 3. I mean, even 1.
Yeah.
If you're like this is it. This silver bullet right here.
Yeah, I think the approach we have to the American founding is fundamentally flawed as a historical matter. So
Eat that mic. Just put your
the
mouth
thing
on it.
that's usually done is you cherry pick and stack up a bunch of founders quotes.
Right.
Already there you have a problem because who are the founders, right? So it's always capital F, founders.
Right.
You're usually limiting
King
yourself.
George was a founder.
King George the third is a founder.
Definitely a founder.
So you've got usually 3. Who are your 3 founders?
Yeah.
Can you name more than 3? Can you name more than 5? Probably not.
Right.
Slavery was another founder.
Slavery's a founder. 1619 is a founder. So you do that, and you cherry pick a few quotes, and then that's supposed to demonstrate whatever your thesis is, about the nature of the country, which, typically is going to be a liberal, secular,
Right.
Godless constitution, whatever you want to say. So methodologically, it's flawed of where we're looking, at private correspondence, the private musings of a few men. I, in general, am skeptical of all elitist opinion wherever it's published. It could be true, but I think we should treat that the same in every epoch of history. And so what's much more interesting to do if you want to understand the nature of the country is to look at public consensus documents. This is, in my opinion, a very reformed historiographical conviction, is to say there's lots of theologians. They can say lots of good things. The thing that determines orthodoxy, though, would be your consensus confessions, right? So you can do something very similar with American history where you can look at public documents that represent deliberation and consensus on the behalf of the populace through their representatives. And that demonstrates something more accurate and more accessible about the character of the country than trying to stack up quotes from John Adams or Thomas Jefferson. So that leads to the second point, which I would say the scope of our public documents should not be limited to the Declaration of Independence and the federal Constitution. Standing behind those and in conjunction with those is a recognition of our federalist structure, which has to include the state constitutions. And of course, in our original structure, this has been eroded to a significant degree over, especially in the 20th century, but the states would be the central moral and political loci of the republic. This is actually where
the states are central.
The states are central in this regard. They have much more leeway through their inherited police powers that they say are derived from their royal charters, and these are never given up. The only thing new that happens at the founding is the union, right? So they're where you should look for activity early on, and their constitutions are important for determining the nature and character of the country at the time. And even before those, you should also look deeply at colonial documents, which represent the inheritance of those states and tell you something about them. So those are three, I would say, ways that they flow together that we methodologically have kind of screwed this question up. And most people, I don't think about any of those data points.
So first being consensus documents.
Public consensus, yeah.
Don't just pull quotes, even if it's a good quote.
Yeah.
Grab consensus documents. Second, state constitutions would be significant consensus documents that tell us what the people were like, what the founding's like. And third, the colonial charters and various constitutions that before statehood.
I would still charters is one of them, but we can broadly categorize it as constitutional documents. It's just of a different form.
Right.
So those 2 and 3 are kind of the same then, right?
They're similar. There's different different epics or different periods. So one is pre separation from Britain. One is post. But there's much congruence and agreement between them. And the colonial charters have a different role. They're setting up more or less what we'd call corporations, or they in fact call them that have royal approval to go and settle this area. But they oftentimes would allude to other purposes that they had, and then especially in a lot of the New England states, you have something like the Massachusetts Body of Liberties, where they're developing something of a legal code. Those are very important, documents, as well as things like the Cambridge Platform, which is a demonstration in response to the passage of the Westminster Confession of the particular polity. So they adopt the confession, but they want to demonstrate their distinctions in their polity, which is both church and state at the time.
What was that called again? What was that document?
The Cambridge Platform, 1648. Also very, very important, even though it's largely it's developed by a state called Synod, but it demonstrates something about the colonial background. And I take all my lead on this from a letter John Adams wrote, a Frenchman in 1760s maybe, or quite a bit thereafter, probably 1780s, maybe 83. And he's saying, if you really want to understand what we've been doing over here, you're not going to be able to do that if you neglect the colonial period. You have to understand the background of the people to see where they've gone. You have to know where they've come from. So the colonial data is generally neglected, in my experience, by historians of the founding period, and the ones that do better are usually people that have some familiarity with the period.
So when the whites colonized America, were
They were generally.
So what I heard is colonialism. That's what I heard. No, would you say that? How would you answer the question that we are founded as a Christian nation.
Wait. Before you even get there, is that the right question to be asking? Because you say, what were they trying to do over here? Right? When Adams is saying, hey, you got to understand what's going on here in the colonies, what were they trying to even do? And is that even the right question to be asking?
I think it's a perfectly fine question to be asking. So what were they trying to do? Well, some of the documents tell you as much. What would you say? The Mayflower Compact tells you what they're trying to do. But even you can jump way far ahead. Look at the Northwest Ordinance, right? After the founding of the country, it's dealing with the federal territory that we've now acquired. And it discusses, not extensively, but it makes sure to mention the fact that part of the propagation of Christianity to some extent is wrapped up in the goal of what we're going to do. So this is explicitly stated all over the place.
So Idaho was acquired in part for the propagation of the Christian religion.
Yeah, you can absolutely say that. So I don't understand what kind of nation would say those things that's not a Christian nation. And it's unless you're going to claim it's accidental and that, within a couple years of its quote unquote founding, which I would say you should begin, in 1630 or so to start understanding how the country's founded, unless you're going to say it departs so briskly from its founding purpose, I would say, and no one seems to be indicating at the time that that's the case, then it's doing what it was founded to be. And it seems very much to me that it's operating as a Christian nation for a generally Christian people. And you see this all over the place. In John Adams's inaugural address, he just refers offhand as if it's no big deal to the Americans as Christian people. It's just how he thinks of them.
Right.
You see these sort of self-declarations of identity all over the place. Usually the comeback to that is to say something, well, it doesn't say this in the federal Constitution. It doesn't say that it's a Christian nation. It doesn't even mention God, right? This is the godless Constitution argument. The state constitutions, provide pushback on that argument quite a bit. And so when you're almost all of them or all of them to some degree or another do recognize God and mention him in various forms. And then you have many stipulations that of course go much further to this point. So even in a place like Tennessee, when they have their first constitution closing out the 18th century, it's one of the few constitutions in the founding period that there's several that don't have an establishment. Tennessee decides to explicitly say, we will not have an established denomination. But then it goes on to present a religious test for office that everyone who takes office has to affirm God and the end of life and all these things, all these very orthodox things. So
Texas
it's like,
still has that in there.
Yeah.
You can't run.
Can't tell.
Right.
In Texas, it's in the books that you still can't run if you don't believe in God.
Yeah.
right.
If you're an atheist, you can't run, but they don't follow that anymore.
Yeah, this is, if I'm not mistaken, this is actually still somewhat valid or debated in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Very just a formality at this point. But
Right.
the point being, so even a state that was adamant and very different from other states, if they're doing this in 1791, to say, we're not going to have an establishment. We don't believe in that. And then the very next, stipulation is,
But you have to believe in God.
You got to believe in God and the Trinity and things like this.
Right.
Even Trinitarian is specific.
Yeah, these are New Hampshire does the same thing. Many of them do. Of course, South Carolina, you have to be a Protestant.
Sorry, Mormons.
Yeah, that's not happening at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have these all over the place. New Jersey's original state constitution has this great article, I think Article 19, that guarantees the freedom of conscience for everybody. It's really great. The very next article says, yeah, but only Protestants can run the place. So it also changes how we think about the distinction they still had that was alive and well at the time, the difference between belief and action. Now we've kind of melded, the right of conscience into action as well.
Right.
And you'll see older Protestants writing about this, like Richard Baxter would say, no one's talking about persecuting belief. You can't do that. But we are talking about persecuting action. And so if you have, illegal action, that has to be punished.
Right.
So that something of that distinction is still alive and well at the time. And they just kind of recognize that we want certain people running the place and passing laws. That doesn't mean you have to persecute anyone else, but it also doesn't mean that everyone is treated the same at a social or a political level. So that's across the board. So the point is, you have a very different picture than the quote unquote godless Constitution presents initially, as your typical interlocutors will say.
So then you have you marked out earlier that 1630 is where you start seeing really the founding of America, right? That's where it came. Okay,
that's where I like to start. Yeah.
So then, what do you do with 1619 to start seeing, actually,
he's avoiding it.
Yeah, I noticed that you just jumped up 11 years there.
I have a historical reason for saying 1630. I follow Perry Miller, the great Puritan scholar, in saying that the founders of the Massachusetts Bay Colony are the first politically self-conscious colonists. They come to perform or establish a socio-political project. Other colonies that had dotted the coast up till then had either failed miserably. I mean, Jamestown is largely a failure,
right?
Or they were purely economic enterprises. And then you have Plymouth, of course, in 1620. You could start there, and some people may want to. They're not as capable and as able as the people that come in 1630. People that come in 1630. There's a lot of them. It's basically a fleet.
Sounds like a racist argument. They're just capable.
Yeah, racist against the Plymouth.
Against the Pilgrims.
The other guys from East Anglia. Yeah.
Have you been watching 1619 Hulu or something like that? Is that what's wrong with you right now? You're all
obsessed.
on. Okay, we'll get there.
A little sassy day.
Yeah.
Sure.
Keep going.
Yes. So
I threw them off. It worked.
They're very well resourced. They're guys. John Winthrop is all intents and purposes the founder of the colony, governor for a long time. He's a lawyer and a statesman and a businessman, and has been. He's in his 40s and he's been doing this for a while. Endicott, who's another governor, it comes with them. Your ministers like John Cotton, Richard Mather. These are all very capable people, and they bring a lot of resources with them, and they kind of get down to business, and they know that what they're in very short order. What they're doing is not just an economic enterprise. It's not even for religious liberty. Let's just throw that out. It's not a religious liberty project. It is an establishment project to do it the way they want to do it. They're not interested in being Rhode Island or what Rhode Island becomes, right? Rhode Island is like, some people described it, rather provocatively. It's like the drain that they throw all their heretics into.
Yeah, I've read that.
Like they're not interested in what that becomes.
That's sort of like the original libertarianism.
Yeah. It is the original libertarianism. Yeah, they would call them libertines, right? Of course,
right.
And would defend themselves throughout. So there's an interesting case in the 1680s, jumping ahead, where some Anabaptists are protesting their inability to be involved in the franchise, to vote, to have freemanship.
Oh, the good old days.
Yeah. So that when you have to deal with just Anabaptists.
Look at white people frustrating voting rights for the long, since
they've always been
1680.
Doing it. They've always been doing it. No, way before. Way before.
Hey, you better give us our respect, bro.
We didn't learn this recently. So they
required IDs back then. I mean, it's incredible.
They probably did.
Yeah.
They probably did.
Right.
Well, you can just tell an Anabaptist by looking at them. So you don't need.
They're fully wet.
You don't. Yeah, they're fully wet all the time.
Sorry, I got
look like they were born yesterday.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Don't at me.
Born again. Yes. Sorry.
We've had some bumps with Baptists on this show. I don't know if you're aware.
I'm not.
No. Keep going, man. Keep going.
Good, never mind.
You say it's like it's a bad thing.
No, we love them.
No,
okay.
we love them.
They love us.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so 1680, this group of Anabaptists come to the leaders of the colony, and they're like, "Hey, we're not getting our due, and wasn't this colony founded for religious liberty?" And they quickly disabuse them of that in public print and say, "No, that's not what this is about. Absolutely not." So you can be, this idea that they have of toleration is very different. That doesn't mean, it means you don't run around just killing people because you think they believe something different. But it's judging public action that's based on promulgated standards, promulgated by the ones who have care of the community. So the definition of law, and they're on notice, right? They make very clear what they're doing there, and they say you can come join us if you want to. If not, there's lots of places to live,
right?
And that's why their favorite punishment was banishment. I think if you're in the 17th century, that's a pretty good deal, considering what else they could do to you.
Right.
It's usually people that won't abide the banishment that they have a problem with. They keep coming back, like the Quakers. So,
okay, I want to get back to 1619, but this is fascinating. So right now, our biggest arguments against whatever's going on with the state is religious liberty. The way that we're arguing, that's problematic then, isn't it?
In many ways, it can be. Yeah.
Why?
Why?
Well, there's a sense in which if you use arguments to win a case, or to win, let's just say even a public case, right? Publicly, just in polemically, that in the long run undermines you, but in the short term wins because you're appealing to popular sensibilities about autonomy and private belief in these things.
I shouldn't be vaccinated because I have religious liberty. That's what people have been using that argument.
And it's often effective, and there's a sense in which Americans are still sensitive to some idea of this, so it works. In the long run, though, you may be undercutting your ability to legislate morally in public, or to even favor a particular type of morality, heaven forbid, right? That then has demands upon other members of the populace as well, not just your private conduct.
Because they get to say, you got to stay in your religious liberty lane. This legislating ain't for you. We'll give you your little carved out spot that you got to stay in.
Right, which gets smaller and smaller. The prayer closet's getting a lot smaller day by day, right?
We kicked the gays out and put the Christians in.
Right.
They were in a prayer closet?
Well, they prayed to their gods. You didn't see the Oscar or the Grammys? Yeah, that was their prayers. Worship time.
That was wild. I don't have to tell you what the New Englanders would have done to that kind of behavior, right?
Even them, right?
Okay.
They wouldn't let him vote. We know that.
Definitely wouldn't vote. No IDs. No IDs. I do think that, one, you're talking about differences in strategies and what have you. There's a sense in which, sometimes there's short-term wins you can't pass up, or you in order to fight another day, and you have to just kind of play the game
Tactically.
But there may be other times when prudentially you can decide actually it'd be better to take the short-term loss and maybe the long-term win.
I want to, since we brought up the Grammys, we're already here. So, we can circle back to the founding.
Okay. I want to get to 1619.
Yeah. But I'm going to, so here it is. You got the Grammys. I don't know. You got drag queen story hours. Mm-hmm. You got David French saying if you don't allow the drag queen story hours, clearly you don't understand the First Amendment.
Yeah, you don't understand liberty.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So, how bad is it? Like in your like right now, like in terms of, where America is, where we came from, and maybe specifically with an eye to the Christian church, as represented sort of by a David French type. How bad is it?
I think it's pretty bad. I think you guys think it's pretty bad.
With
a post-mill love for
with the post-mill, yeah.
Right. We're winning, but it's bad.
Right, it's bad. It's bloody. But David French is such an interesting. He's like a caricature of himself in many ways at this point. But David French. This would actually get to what we were just talking about. David French, in many ways, at least in his public kind of persona and writings, which is all I know about David French. His morality, or his only moral compass in his reasoning and his arguments, is more or less the First Amendment, and how he sees the relative private protection of the First Amendment at this stage. This is how he himself explained his position on gay marriage at this point, the flip.
Right.
At this point, he has now decided religious liberty is sufficiently protected that now he can fully express himself, come out of the closet and his belief in that. And so this is another one of those issues of where we've made the First Amendment, our shield, and it's what protects us from harm, and it basically also at the same time precludes you from making any public judgment against any other lifestyles, and we can have this live and let live sort of attitude. And he's an exemplar of this kind of approach to public life, and this is why, touching on Drag Queen Story Hour, I think he was so adamantly opposed to people like Sohrab Ahmari, who were confronting him in public and saying, as Amari pointed out, Al Mohler called him out. It was like, if this isn't a cultural crisis, what is? How do you determine that? David French doesn't know how to determine that. It would be my opinion because he lives in kind of procedure land with the First Amendment as a fully orbed morality.
Do the writers of the original Bill of Rights and the consensus at the time, you read them I mean, are they thinking anything like? And of course, sometimes still have to be drag queens in public libraries.
No, they wouldn't. No. Okay.
I mean, I'm just checking. I just wanted to check.
No, just checking in. That's good. That's good.
I'm pretty sure not, but I'm just
pretty sure not.
Yeah.
Not. Tom Paine and Jefferson got into some weird stuff, and Ben Franklin too. Yeah. But I don't think that far. Although France was wild at the time, but so to provide some context for you have the First Amendment, great. But as we've already discussed, at the state level constitutions give you something of a taste for maybe how this should be read. So very obviously, this is not even up for debate. The First Amendment in the federal Constitution does not apply to the states originally, right? It's not incorporated until 1947. So it doesn't apply to the states. The only thing it's really saying at all is that there will be no national establishment.
Right.
That's it. It's a very interesting question then to say if it's not applied to the states and there's really no federal context in which it does anything other than keeping the federal government from playing with or bothering the state level establishments, which there were until 1833. What does the free exercise clause mean? Anyway.
Don't leave that there. You got to work that one out.
Well, I think it's an interesting question. So,
yeah, it is.
What do you do? It has a lot to do with what you do with your punctuation. But when it says the Establishment Clause comes first, right? Pass no law, pertaining to the establishment of religion, or the free exercise thereof. Free exercise thereof what? Establishment of okay. So that's an interesting question. But it doesn't really matter how you answer it because there is no activity at the federal level in that regard for a long time. At the state level, all the way up through the 19th century, you have Sabbath laws that are totally constitutional up through into the 20th century. Yeah. You have blasphemy laws. You have blasphemy cases. You have case law. You have, as I already said, religious establishments. I mean, even recent work by someone who would not be near as radical as I am on some of these, but it was very smart. Philip Munoz, his recent book on the Establishment Clause or in the First Amendment generally to some extent. I mean, even he is talking about how most people at the time when they're dissenting against established denominations, they really just don't want to be taxed. That's it really. There's no other problem. The parish tax is what's kind of bothering them to pay for public ministers, which places like Massachusetts and New Hampshire did, and some other ones as well.
Okay.
Their problems are really not the religious test for offices. Even the ones that are limited to Protestants, those aren't really the problem. So Baptists aren't bummed out by those too much. They just don't want to be taxed, and so you wrestle with that for a while, and you could debate, the justice or injustice of doing that. The point is, there's an enormous amount of religious activity that's officially state sanctioned or state protected for over a century in the country, while the federal Constitution still exists and no one has a problem with it.
Right, and you have presidents and Congresses even giving prayers, calling for days of prayer, days of fasting to the Triune God, to the Father of the Lord Jesus. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. You have all of these, and there's sometimes secular historians will say. They'll point to something like nature and nature's God as if this is the deist language.
Right.
The deism category is way overused for this very reason as a sort of cudgel. One interesting data point on this front is to look at something like public election sermons throughout the colonial period all the way up through the founding. Okay, these are readily available online. Everyone should read them. You will see in those a very interesting trend because a lot of them are fairly repetitive. They have a basic form they're following every year. They're calling, the three estates of your governors and churchmen to their biblical mandates of what they're supposed to do for the populace and to each other. Every year you're doing that. Different text, but you're doing the same thing. A very interesting thing to notice as you read more and more and more of them is when they're at the stage of talking about things that pertain to or derive from reason or natural revelation, they will use these sort of broad categories for God, the Creator, Almighty, these sort of things.
Okay.
Then when you move into doctrinal elements that are derived from special revelation, the ministers, the preachers who are clearly orthodox will transition into more specific language that's only derived from special revelation. So I think at the time of the founding, the reason you use these perhaps more vague labels for God is because it's common practice, something that's not even thought about. It's a convention to use when you're talking about matters of government, which are derived from special or from general revelation and reason and prudence, as our confession says. You use those types of, this is the practice that's been demonstrated for them even by ministers, is to use these broader categories because you're in that wheelhouse of revelation. So that's another very common argument from atheist or secular scholars to say, well, where's Jesus Christ, in the Declaration or whatever. Yeah. And it's something that exposes a sort of lack of familiarity with the milieu that they're referring to.
All right. I got another question.
Go ahead.
Can I ask it now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. You want to do something different?
My head hurts. My head hurts.
I can tell you got quiet and stopped talking crazy.
My head hurts.
I'm curious about, the confession says, particularly on the law of God, that the laws of the nation of Israel have expired with the state thereof, except for the general equity thereof. What can you tell us about that phrase, the general equity? Yeah. And does that show up in the founding documents and or conversation? One of the things, so back of this is we call ourselves theonomists, general equity theonomists, whatever. Sure. But the point being is that, okay, these are Presbyterians who hold the Westminster Confession coming over here, many of them, and they're setting up Sabbath laws. They're setting up, laws that for many modern Presbyterians
would reflect Old Testament.
Yeah, but they're taking biblical principles and they're applying it. And I'm saying that looks like general equity to me. That looks like they're taking the biblical law as it got worked out in the Western common law tradition, and then just applying it and saying here in our Massachusetts Bay Colony, this is how it's going to get applied or whatever. And you say that, and people say you're a theonomist and whatever, and you're in trouble. But you say, but didn't our founders hold to this, given what they're doing? That's the back of my question. But I'm asking, if that's what they held to, general equity.
Yeah.
How they interpret
law of God. What does that mean to them? And how is that, why are they passing laws for Sabbath or against blasphemy or things like that? Isn't that them reasoning from the biblical principles of the law and then as it's been worked out in the Western common law?
Yeah. So a couple things that I think there's multiple elements to that question, which is a good one. General equity, I think historically, pre-founders, 16th century back, is sort of a legal term of art that is a way of referring to, equity. Generally, you will see the word equity used pre-1619.
This is the first CRT. Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, it's the first CRT language that was...
confession, obviously. So
he's back.
We know that. We've established that. I wanted to bring... I'm ecumenical in that way. Keep people at the table.
Yeah.
So equity is, a term of art just in jurisprudence that is a reference, of course, to fairness, to natural justice, to these sorts of things, depending on how the context and how you use it. So in the confession, general equity is referring to the things that are in the law of God, as we would call it, the civil judicial law of Old Testament Israel, that are, of course, we would refer to them as natural law or elements of natural law. And what you have in the civil judicial law of Israel is a perfect instantiation of the natural law for a particular people, which is what a good lawmaker does. So what God's showing there is showing how it's done to legislatures. Now, the problem is you can't just replicate that anywhere, right? Because it is particularized to those people. That's what a prudent. So Thomas Aquinas, Martin Luther will both say this. They'll say, look, if there's an element of civil or judicial law in Old Testament Israel that fits your polity appropriately as a prudent ruler, go for it. There's, of course, nothing wrong with it. But in general, this can't just be transported to anybody. So I think that's what the confession is getting at, is saying, God through Moses is the perfect legislature, and he shows you how it's done, how you use the very general natural law to arrive at secondary conclusions and then to apply it to people. Of course, we, being this side of both testaments of Scripture, would say we also have Scripture that's reinstantiates that for us, republicizes it, because we're really bad at reason a lot of times.
No.
It's true. But okay, so that's general equity, and that's how I think it's used in the confession. That's how I think Calvin uses it. That's how I think it's used throughout time, and including in the common law tradition. But now there's no question that everyone in the founding period and even our common law jurists that we look up to, Edward Cook or Matthew Hale or whomever, are thoroughly biblically literate.
That's my guy.
Right?
That's my guy.
I had to plug
NSA.
Hale.
That's where you want to go.
So here's a great data point. Everyone should go. I'm assuming it's available online. It's available somewhere. Yeah. Everyone should go look up Taylor's case. It's what's called 1676. Is that right? This is where Matthew Hale. It's not the first one to do it, but where he declares Christianity part of the common law, and we're going to come back to this in a second when we talk about the reason for enforcement of Sabbath laws and blasphemy laws. Specifically the latter. Okay, so there's no doubt that our jurists, like Matthew Hale, or even our founders, even the ones we call Unitarians or deists or whatever, know the Bible better than we do. And they're better readers of everything than we are. They also know the classics better than anyone who's been through a great books program you will meet.
Right.
It's just the way it is, and they're better at reading what they have than we are, even though they have access to somewhat more limited information. So there are also a bunch of law nerds. Like the whole nation's a bunch of law nerds.
Right.
I mean, Edmund Burke talks about this. Like everyone, you can look at library list of people. They have all these legal commentaries. Like regular widows will be like, their husband died and they're leaving their stuff to their kids, and they have like Calvin's Institute in Blackstone or something. So it's a weird place.
I love that place.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
more of that.
That's amazing.
And probably a gun.
Yeah.
But
Come on now, my kind of women.
So
Muzzleloader too.
So the point is that our founders are very biblically literate. There's tons of great historical work on the amount of citations to the Bible throughout the period. Even when you have someone as radical as Thomas Paine, he knows when he writes Common Sense that he basically has to use not only Old Testament proof text, but a sort of milieu to talk about just and unjust rule and tyranny and these things, because this is what communicates to. So there's no doubt that he's a biblical skeptic, but he knows he has to use this to be effective polemically in the country, because that tells you something more. What secular historians do is then look at Thomas Paine and the Age of Reason and say, see, this tells you something. The Age of Reason was like roundly castigated when it made it back overseas, and Thomas Jefferson got in all this trouble for writing like an endorsement. So Thomas Paine doesn't represent America at the time, but what he has to do to be effective does, right?
I see.
So the biblical literacy is high. There's no doubt that people think in biblical categories, and of course we'll reference these things. Is it a one-to-one, sort of application of elements of biblical law as it was giving to Israel? I do not think that's always the case. Mm-hmm. But there are, of course, perennial things, and they are all natural law jurists and thinkers in a classical vein. That these categories are pretty fluid, in my opinion, the way they work in their own minds. So you will see an early
natural law, biblical law. That's fluid, or what's fluid?
I think these sources of revelation in this context are somewhat fluid, because of course they imagine that there's agreement. If
they're not very separate, is what you're saying. They're not separated too much the way that they think about.
I think you can oscillate between both, because they should agree.
It's the same author. It's the same author.
It's the same author.
Yeah.
Right. When you're talking about government, right? I'm not talking about the Trinity or something.
Right.
Sure.
So of course these are in agreement, and it's very common at the time in common law courts to have scripture citations. I mean, that's just something you do. Does it mean that they are card-carrying theonomists?
Yes.
No.
Yes. Okay. Of course they are. That's what other kind of theonomy are we talking about?
There's other possible buckets you can fall in.
Well, we don't like those guys. This is the one we like. That's what we call theonomy right there.
So I mean, to kind of clumsily answer the question, there's no doubt the Bible is authoritative and in play, and everyone's reading it, and it comes into public debates and even our legal mechanisms and precedent and all these things. Is it as simple as maybe some people want to make it today? I don't think so. But we're dealing with quite learned people that have, for all the disagreement, quite a bit of fundamental agreement in the way. So a lot of things are just left unsaid, I think, but is part of our problem.
Those people today would be labeled theonomists easily.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not a liberal, you're labeled a theonomist. I deal with this all the time.
Yeah,
I've written this fairly critically of theonomy, but I'm still called a theonomist pretty regularly.
I think you're a theonomist.
That's fine.
I like you that way. Okay. I mean, I let you make laws.
So I guess, so if you say that's the perfect instantiation of the eternal character of God, the natural law, and it's given by God directly. And you say, okay, it has specific things that are for that specific that time and place and culture and so forth. But there are general principles there that are instantiated that we're to learn from and we're to apply then prudentially to our context. How's that not theonomy?
So I would say this is. So I'm going to tell you. I think general equity theonomist as a label is somewhat superfluous. It doesn't have any meaning to me because I don't quite understand what's meant to distinguish themselves from theonomist. And then if you recognize,
we're the good kind,
right?
That's what
so I see it as basically a rehabilitation effort. That's totally fine. This is your prerogative. Okay, so what I take to be lots of people try to critique theonomy on these on this meta scale. It's like a hermeneutic and all this. This is all boring. Okay. The one thing that is going on with theonomy that I think is where the rubber meets the road, you either accept this or you don't. Theonomists have to believe, one, that the civil and judicial law as applied to Israel is equally applicable to any just civilization. Okay, as it stated, there are no further.
I guess I'd need to break down that term. Like, what do you mean by equally?
I guess that's why
I would say,
do murderers get the death penalty?
Right, they would say, of course you have to, not just can they, but you have to, or at least this is the ceiling.
Yes.
You could at least say this is the ceiling. Yeah. This and no further. And so what I would actually say this is like the distinction is, where are the traffic laws in Old Testament Israel?
Right.
So. Can't have those.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So I'm not saying you guys think to this extreme, but this is basic theonomy. You have to do it this way or otherwise it's losing its distinction.
I'm fine with some of that though. It's like I don't want to force people to get insurance or have to wear their seatbelt or drinking and driving. I don't,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm fine with that.
All right. That's fine. So you're a theonomist. That's great.
Yeah.
We've established that. All right. So
there's no crime
the
there.
Thing.
Yeah.
Right. So crime is defined by this limited case.
Right.
And something I've flagged before is that theonomists have no taxonomy of law. So I would, and I think most Reformed would, throughout the ages, ascribe to Thomas Aquinas' basic definitions of law and taxonomy, which has the eternal law, which is in God Himself, is God's character, the natural law, which is God's eternal character and being with a creaturely reference, so it's condescended, and then you have human law and divine law, or inscripturated law. And the human law is just man applying the natural law to the context. It must be agreeable. And then there's, of course, scripture that's like your check. So these are your categories. Theonomists don't really have, at least I'm talking about like Bonson and things, any patience for this, right?
I think Gary North
may be a somewhat different case.
And as well as Rushdoony.
Okay, that's totally fine. I don't see them used in the same way or consistently.
Well, every time they do case laws, like in Tools of Dominion, they lay out the full Levitical case laws in that way.
Right, but once it was okay. So here's the issue. So we get to the taxonomy. This is where they're misusing it. What type of law out of those four is Old Testament civil and judicial law?
I'm sorry, maybe I don't understand.
So in Aquinas' taxonomy, if they use them, so you've got eternal.
I assume that it would be considered inscripturated law.
No.
Okay.
So you've got eternal law, natural law, human law, and divine or inscripturated law.
Okay.
So it's human law. This is according to its genus, this is what it is. It's irrelevant that God is the legislator of it. Inside the taxonomy, it functions as human law. You know it functions as human law because it is confined to and responsive to particular human circumstance. Therefore, that's why it expires with that polity, as the confession says. Okay. So this is I would say this is a huge barrier between me and theonomist. Maybe not adjusted theonomist, but between
why you call me adjusted theonomist like that?
Okay, theonomist.
You know what?
It's kind of racist a little bit. That's a CRT coming out in them,
So I want to talk about this more because this is really interesting because I think if you and I sit down to work through law, we would have no disagreement.
I'm a big fan of traffic laws.
Yeah. Well, I think we would have less problem in that area. Right,
okay.
Like traffic laws are kind of silly, but I think that as we're working down,
I just think if you're gonna have like 16-year-olds driving like piles of metal down the road,
Well,
pretty.
once they pay for the car wreck,
there's a lot of things upstream from that before you ever get to the kids driving that way.
Okay,
right.
Mom and dad.
So there's a lot of things that are in place.
Did Grandpa baptize his babies?
So,
right.
So I think there's a lot of cultural, theological issues that are worked out of upstream that have a lot of different outcomes in the legal, civil aspect of the law.
Yeah.
Right. So you get those things in place, and you don't have to govern every little part of everybody's life.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, sure, but that's a very broad
and this is where
statement.
Right.
So we'd have to get in particular.
But what I'm trying to say is, I think there's a way for us to practically deal with where we are to get upstream and then come back down properly. Does that make sense? So,
Maybe.
Okay, so right now we can't just start cutting off things and start there. We can't do that. That's where a lot of theonomists fail at. Is that they have this kind of fantasy of like, we can only do this and that, and that's the way we can get to law. Well, no, there's some ways to gradually move this thing back to where the authority is properly set in the family, the authority is properly set in the church. I think a lot of your work is doing that very thing. And then from there, as we work, I'm post-mill, there's a lot of laws that get to come off the book because of the way people govern themselves.
Yeah, see, so I'm post-mill too, and so were the Puritans. This is good reason to be post-mill. America's founded by post-mill guys. So there you go. Right. And hey, if theonomists like my stuff, that's great. I do. Have any animus towards theonomists.
Well, of course, a lot of them probably wouldn't like me.
my general take, and this may get too far into the weeds, is that government is not a lamentable response to fallen nature. Government's actually something that's an expression of God's character, and we would always have something like this even in paradise. We'd have law, we'd have regulations, because order is an expression of God's character, and man's a reasonable creature.
But it's pretty low on his priority list.
On his priority list.
I don't know what you mean by that.
I don't either.
Well, what was the first government created? Family. What was the second government created?
Oh, sure, yeah. If you're going to do this, I mean, if we're going to recognize Adam's dual office. Right, even in paradise, I would say you have church and state right there already going.
No, church and family.
I'd say
church.
I do have all three.
State's low on that list, though. That's what I'm saying.
So I would say,
you say go fruitful, multiply first.
Yeah.
And then
so these are fundamental.
And then you got 16-year-olds driving.
Heavy machinery.
Come on.
Yeah, heavy machinery.
I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just saying, like, on the list of where God.
Time to go. I want you to finish because I want to turn the corner here.
Turn the corner.
Okay, I want to talk about critical race theory because 6 years ago, really hardly anybody knew what it was. And it comes in, and I have a love-hate relationship with it because I think a lot of people saw critical race theory come in and they found, a new way for us to write a bunch of books and make a whole lot of money. Yeah. But all they did was explain to us what critical race theory or critical theory was, and it's in everything now. So that's why I was bringing up 1619 Project because it's not, whatever it's doing is trying to get us to reimagine the cosmos. Really, it's a cosmological
not just history, the cosmos.
Right. But people. So I want you to do two things because I hear you're a master with critical theory. I want you to explain to us, Jeff.
What was the voting thing that you already talked about?
Most of the things that people talk about when they talk about critical theory is what it is, and they only define it, but they never tell you how to beat it. And I always feel like this is like being in a wrestling match and somebody says, "Oh, that's a chokehold," and you're like, "Great, now how do I get out of it?" I don't need to just define. I need to know how then do we fight against what we have here, because critical theory has come in and people think that just banning certain books from being taught is going to stop it, or if we can make more laws around it that's going to win. But it doesn't seem.
That's almost like a point of failure. Yeah. We got to this point, we're doing that.
So how do you kind of define for us critical theory, and then how do you take it out at the knees?
Yeah. So I mean, this isn't a as you often hear, the long march through institutions, that the sort of neo-Marxist mantra. So this can't be uprooted overnight. I think that's part of what people wanting a solution expect to hear of, like, okay, how do I get it out? And so maybe we legislate it out of the classroom or whatever. I mean, they're very adaptable and very good at finding ways to get this into things. I mean, you already see this sort of videos floating around online where they'll talk about, we'll just rebrand, we'll just call it something else. And they do that all the time. So I think that's a pretty impotent solution, although it might not be something worth exploring. DeSantis is doing this to some extent. One thing we do, and I'll define it in a minute, I guess.
Yeah, take your time.
Get this thought out of my head. The one thing we do generally in responding to let's just go with like CRT curriculum or something, is to regurgitate sort of liberal myths and narratives as our defense against them. This kind of gets back to what we were talking about with religious liberty before, of like, is the solution worse? So you'll do something like recently in Florida when they're trying to go after the curriculum, which is a good thing to do. They'll say, well, the reason this is bad, it's not necessarily because it's untrue or not. You don't hear this kind of discussion. It's because it's indoctrination, and we know indoctrination's bad, right. And education is something else. Yeah. We don't know what that is, but it's something else. Okay. That's a stupid argument. It's effective, but it's stupid because all education is indoctrination. Otherwise, what are you doing with your kids? Yeah. Okay. This is what we want, actually. And so what you need to do long term, I think, to beat this kind of stuff is to just get real about that and say, these are the decisions we're making here. We're not doing that. We're indoctrinating this way. This is not about equal playing time. This is not about the marketplace of ideas. This is about truth, and we don't want pernicious ideology in ours. We want our ideology, non-pernicious, good stuff.
Right.
Make them all theonomist. I don't care. That's one thing that I think polemically can still be effective, and I understand the short-term goals, but we need to get serious about. So the only way to combat some of this stuff is to
I see what you're saying.
Develop alternative institutions, alternative curriculums in these things, because if you're just going to keep regurgitating the liberal kind of talking points, this is exactly partly what CRT is designed to confront. This
goes back to the whole myth of neutrality and basically thinking of it as just freedom of religion, just freedom from oppression. And you're saying they came over in 1630 not just for freedom from, but freedom to establish a Christian colony, a Christian way of life. And you're saying
that's good.
That's what CRT is fundamentally. It's a way of life. It's a worldview. It's a religion of its own.
I think that's a great way a great analogy to make and a great way to put it. So this is, if you're battling something like that, you've got to meet it in kind on the field, right? You can't keep backpedaling and just longing for 30 years ago, which would just replicate the preconditions for what you already have.
And that's what we keep doing. One of the funny things that we've pointed out in all this is that a lot of these people who are trying to fight CRT have their kids in public school. They went to public school. Their parents went to public school. And it's like, well, public schools are critical theory. I mean, they're evolutionary speaking. All the worldview that comes out of public school is critical theory, and then of course now it's CRT that we're fighting. You can't fight CRT with CR.
Yeah, I mean, public schools, which were originally a Protestant idea in this country to combat. It was a bad solution, but it was to basically combat Catholicism and immigration there. But it's lost its purpose if there ever was a good one. And you
like
have
traffic laws.
Maybe like some traffic laws, but not all of them. And it's a valid category.
Hey, we can do. If me and you came together and made traffic laws, I would do that.
Okay, I'm with fine.
I would let you guys do that.
That's fine.
Hold on, just out of curiosity, is it a sin to break traffic laws?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So your pastor should get on you about breaking traffic laws.
All over.
Okay, so
you're about a speeding ticket.
So there's a practical difference.
It's a crime and a sin.
Because I actually don't think it's a sin at all.
I don't understand how you. So if it's legitimate crime, it's legitimate law passed by legitimate authority.
That's the problem.
No, it's not. That's the problem, though. It's not.
Why is it not a legitimate law?
Because it doesn't have God doesn't give us laws for
restitution.
traffic.
There's no restitution to be associated
what's the damage that's been done?
This is my disagreement with the honest. I don't think I need this explicit demonstration in the Old Testament in order to make it a legitimate law. And the legitimate law is channeled through the fact that you have a legitimate authority doing its job, which is to promulgate regulations, laws for the common good of the people he's caring for.
Right.
There is a reasonable, practical, good use for traffic laws, and they are therefore.
I think they're charitable. I think there's charity,
and therefore it is sinful to certainly willfully.
I would say
break them.
I would put them in the same category as overdue fines at the library. So I don't think it's a sin.
Well, I really hate library fines, but so that's a good one. That's polemically effective, but it's not going to work.
I think it's like polite.
It's good manners.
And good manners.
Oh, this is so lame.
But
polite. What do you? No.
I don't feel bad.
So if the city said you can only water your lawn once a day, and you did it twice a day, you're in sin.
Well, you have a question of whether it's a reasonable regulation. So if it's unreasonable,
but the government did.
Define
they did. No. The government voted in democracy.
Wait. Unreasonable based on.
I don't like
unreasonable
democracy.
based on what standard?
Oh, okay.
So are the means? So is it a legitimate interest for the government, legitimately within?
Who gets to define those things?
Well, we'll get to that. So if it's legitimate
Economy.
thing, right, with reasonable means fitted to a proper end, right? So a proper end would be like what is watering grass?
Well, yeah, there's watering lawn. The city said
what's the ostensible? Why would we do this?
There's not enough water. Fire season.
Okay, great.
Global warming. Global warming.
No, we're not.
Come on, Gabe.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing.
Okay, let's say there's a water shortage.
We just had a sewer increase over global warming initiatives.
We're trying to be
I don't know anything
reasonable.
about that. We're being reasonable. We're reasonable magistrates.
I'm
at this
being
table.
real.
Okay.
I'm being real right
Our producer's agreeing with you right now.
Okay. So there's a water shortage, and we need drinking water.
It's California.
So they say it's California, and the avocados are dying.
now. Well, why is there a water shortage in California? Governor Newsom. I'm telling you right now. I'm telling you right now.
But don't fight the hypothetical. This is like law school 101. You don't get to fight it. Okay. So
This is
hypothetical
where problems start.
This is the hypothetical. There's a water shortage. You're limited to watering your grass once a day.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you get fined. Perfectly legitimate. There's a reasonable end that's within the government purview because we can't solve this problem on an individual level.
Because they won't let you
Can't
drill
do
a
it.
well on your own property.
But you can't add to the hypo either without permission. So this is to illustrate the point. So
I don't know if we'd be under more tyranny or less tyranny with you now. I'm a little concerned.
Much more.
It's like more tyranny.
Much more. Okay.
This is scary.
But this is if you're doing it for this reason, it's a reasonable end. There's no alternative means. There's no better means. This is one way, at least a reasonably competent means to address this problem. That's perfectly legitimate, and then it would be sinful to defy the authorities that have set that regulation in place
Like
for
mask
your
mandates.
good. Well, are masks effective?
Emergency.
According to
they were.
CDC.
Right. So
were.
at one point,
CDC,
at
your
one point it could
authority.
have been. At one point, it could have been reasonable, and at one point, it could not be reasonable. Right? You'd have to debate.
So then
this.
lockdowns would be reasonable too then.
Well, you guys
And
don't
telling
want
you not
hear
to go to work?
Do you guys want to hear about how the Puritans handled this stuff?
They were wrong.
Yeah, they were wrong. Yeah.
I mean, they could be
Because of
wrong,
theology.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
They might have.
The Puritans were perfect.
They might have had a real plague, though.
Well, this is another question. No, this is another question.
I mean, that's another
Yeah.
whole part of this. Is that, I mean,
Right.
This is why I think
So-
Levitical laws would be really good here.
In this context, why?
Because you quarantine the environment that has the impurity.
Sure. Yeah,
You
so
don't
this
go
is just
around and tell
And
everybody.
quarantine the whole
that-
state like our governor did.
So this is where I think it make come really good sense to go. So how does the scripture deal with quarantines?
I think every magistrate should be consulting the scripture and its
You're
laws on a
theonomist.
daily
See,
basis.
I knew it.
But we got it back
We can
in.
make laws
We brought it back
divine.
in.
So this is the same thing you do, even in our jurisdiction. You read case law to start to develop patterns
Yeah.
and ways of
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah.
And then you can apply it by analogy to different circumstances to be helpful. It's never going to be identical.
Right.
This is how the common law operates. And it's so I think this is legitimate. I mean that with all seriousness. I
do
think
too.
every magistrate should read, every Christian should, but magistrates should be consulting the law just like the magistrates
I
of the Old
think
Testament
every governor
did.
and president should rewrite Deuteronomy.
I think that'd be a great
like-
law.
like
That's
the
a
old
reasonable
kings,
law.
you know?
Why should we pass that?
because it says in Deuteronomy 17 that the king should make a copy.
Yeah,
of
but
the
why?
law.
But why is it? So we got to develop it though. Why is he?
But because it
yeah.
gets the principles of God's word into their heart, into their,
So
into
I
their
think
minds.
that's a reasonable end, and I think that's a reasonable means to get the principles of law.
And there's,
You know what? This
and
is,
there's, and there's
can
a
I-
Bible verse.
Can I just say this though? I know you're not a theonomist, but
Yeah.
I would much rather be having this conversation about law
Right.
and issue
Yeah,
because
that's right.
whatever wrestling we're going to do, the wrestling we're going to do is trying to figure out how does the word really apply in real time. and
Our
space
interest
to
is
us.
actually having a Christian society.
Right.
That's
That
our
is
goal
our
and interest.
interest.
And
Right.
there'll be differences of exactly how to apply scripture, how to apply
Yeah, that's
natural
right.
law, and so forth. But I'd much rather have that debate
We aren't trying
Absolutely,
to jam
yeah.
the Bible into secularism.
than trying to convince Christians
Yeah.
not to let drag queens dance
and
in front of their kids.
I prefer theonomists to neo-Calvinist Kuyperians for this very reason. So I don't want.
Neo-Calvinist
I thought
Kuyperian.
I was a
Yeah, I don't want this
Kuyperian.
secularized Christianity
Oh, yeah,
business.
yeah.
Theonomists are much better on this. So,
That's a good way to label. Okay, I like that.
Neo-Calvinists, are you saying secularized Kuyperians, basically? Is that what you mean by that?
no, Kuyperians and neo-Calvinists are, I guess, basically synonymous. I don't know, they can
I've been calling
define
myself a
themselves as
Kuyperian for years, and I thought that was a good thing.
So what do you mean by Kuyperian then?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. The neo-Calvinists that have at least, it's much more popular now because of Bavinck becoming accessible again, and Kuyper as well. That model for engagement, especially with culture, but then also a sort of organization of your socio-political model, I think is distinctive within the tradition. I mean, Kuyper seems to even been recognizing that he's going beyond what the reformers would do.
You mean like kind of his sphere sovereignty thing?
Certainly sphere sovereignty, and then their general approach of Kuyperians will describe themselves this way: of this is a Christianized secularism or Christianized pluralism. It's very sympathetic to the situation at the time, right? The late 19th, early 20th century in the Netherlands, and pluralism is taken kind of for granted. So the Christian ethic and worldview is meant to fit into that pre-existing condition, and I think you're already ceding too much by adopting this sort of value, or at least finding it accessible.
That's interesting. We got David Bonson coming on next Tuesday, and I asked him where you stand on all this, and he describes himself as I'm a big Calvin guy, but also heavily influenced by Kuyper and Banvik on this stuff.
Bavink.
Bavink.
Bamvink. Unknown Reformed theologian. Bamvink.
I'm from Texas. This is Bavink. On general liberal order stuff, I would say Locke is important, but Westminster Divines and American founders as well. Hard to get better than Burke. So would that be kind of that neo?
I'm not quite sure what he means because it's a lot of different things.
That neo-Calvinism, Kuyper.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to I think if David Bonson would consider himself generally a classical liberal, probably, right?
I think he uses that. I mean, he actually
used it with me.
With you, actually, with your victory. He said this is a victory for classical liberalism.
Which I know, or I would think for him has a lot to do with economics. Okay,
Yeah,
so we can table that for a minute. Generally, the classical liberal kind of label is an approach to social order, which I do think will cede or accept or appreciate things like pluralism, maybe even to some extent multiculturalism, and a sort of procedural basis for forming the society. I find all of these things uncompelling, so I would never use that label for myself.
Because it doesn't begin from a place that says this is God's world. He established government. Government is meant to serve him, like from jump, like starting there.
I'd be more cynical than that and just say it's an impossibility that every society establishes a controlling ethic and a controlling morality that then is promulgated through its laws and customs.
Pluralism.
And this is just what happens.
Pluralism doesn't exist.
Yeah, not in the way that
they want it.
That pluralists claim it does.
Right. In the same way, like the myth of neutrality.
Yeah.
Like there's no neutrality.
Yeah, this just doesn't exist. This is the only thing I believe from Van Til is the myth of neutrality. So I plug it as much as I can. But it doesn't.
The only thing he just said that on Cross Politic. That's the only thing.
That's the only thing you liked about Van Til.
The only thing. It's not even unique to him. I just say this.
I heard Van Til and I was like, all right, that's cool.
The only reason I say that is to dig at Van Tilians. Okay, so
I like you.
So are you not precept?
Yeah. No, I'm not precept. No, whoa, I can't believe I almost said that. Yeah. I hear pre and I think pre-mill, and so that's That's good.
So right.
No, not
but,
precept.
so you aren't precept?
No.
You're classical?
I don't. I'm above labels.
We've been talking about labels.
Okay, wait. Okay, so listen,
Timon Cline above labels on Cross Politics.
I just don't.
So we can call him a Calvinist.
He's a theonomist. He's Kuyperian. He's Van Til. That's all I heard.
Hey, you said post-mill. You're post-mill. There you go.
So
absolutely.
I think part of this conversation, we kind of got in the weeds a little bit, but I appreciate that. I want to get really practical for just the last moment here. Where do we go from here? How do we get back to where we can actually have real fights again? You know what I mean? Because I don't think we can. Right now,
I don't think I can sit down with a liberal and talk with them. They believe a man can be a woman. You know.
I mean, where I even miss where theonomists used to fight with each other. Sure. But right now, the walls are down. There's no protections. We are all back to back with each other, and we're going to have to figure out how to get our culture back. Yeah, where's our good point of attack, and where do you put your time and energy at building so that we can get back to having these kind of fights and they actually matter? Because right now, everything we just said really doesn't matter in one sense. Yeah. Because that's not where we're at yet. Now we need to work these out.
It'd be great if like federal vision was a big debate again, right? That'd be fun.
Technically, that's what's going on right now.
Okay. So I have two thoughts on this. One, the only practical kind of advice, and it's very general, I think about in this context of sort of, people want to restore their country. They want to yeah, they of course love their country and they hate what's happening to it. They know that they're angry. They're not quite sure of all the causality, but they know there's a problem. One thing you could say is just to start trying to recover the last things most recently lost, right? You could try to do that. And I think there's
segregation. Oh, wait, no, not that.
No.
Not that one. Sorry.
You're
So
talking about
bathrooms.
men and women's bathrooms?
A bathroom.
That kind of segregation?
Okay.
That's what I was meaning.
Okay. So you can start doing that. You could go through the list. You could say, abortion, that's recently a
Right.
partial win. Great. Still, it's still not thoroughly eradicated, but
Right.
maybe we're working on it. You could say no fault divorce. You could say many things. And there's some sense to that. You could even say Sabbath laws. They're not lost that long ago.
Right.
But in general, I'm actually pretty pessimistic for the time being on this type of question because I think the question is premature. I don't think we have fully adjudicated or even developed an ideal that's capable of being adjudicated of what we want to get back to. And part of that, as you guys know from our conversation here, is understanding maybe something of what we were. Now that itself doesn't even have to be definitive, and there's no real chance to replicate the past, but we at least should understand when we say we want to get back to something, what that something is. And I don't think that that's been done yet. I don't think Christians have a good understanding of that. And certainly most historians don't. Until we do that, until we develop an ideal, a sort of vision, we're not capable of making practical, prudential concessions to our current moment that would actually be effective at having any progress. So,
well, that's bleak.
It's very bleak. I don't think we fully described or figured out all the problems. We're doing some of that, and we certainly haven't figured out what the ideal vision would be that we'd want to rally everybody to march towards. And until we figure that out, we really have no business trying to direct people in any particular way because we don't know what we're trying to get to.
So then let me ask the question another way. What does a son of Issachar look like right now?
I think, this is self-serving, but I think some of what
White
the
hair,
things I've
blue
tried,
eyes, little,
yeah, well tailored.
Where's the code?
You give me a patch, we're gonna have a problem.
So, one thing we should be doing is I'm serious about the questions I just raised. We should try to work on those. I'm not just saying that to be bleak, but it is bleak. We should be working on those. We should try to think about what the ideal would be, and part of that is recovering what our history actually was. And that does provide instructive examples. You can, and it also, we need to reestablish ideally as Christians, as Protestants, what the real Overton window is. This is why I talk about things like blasphemy laws. It's not because we can get those back tomorrow.
Right.
But it's because if you say, hey, in your country, up through the 19th century, you were punishing public blasphemy. Then you feel pretty confident going in to protest the local drag queen story hour. Right. You're like, okay, if that's the Overton window, I don't have to be bashful about this. So it does have some immediate effect, but at the same time, we should really keep working on developing, a true understanding of our history, fully orbed, and then running that through that should be instructive for our doctrine, but it's not exhaustive for our doctrine as Protestants of what the social order should look like. So these debates, maybe they don't matter practically to anyone right now, but they should happen. We should.
I agree.
Give us just a couple of resources. What should we read?
His blog.
You should definitely read American Reformer. That's
You're the editor for that.
I'm the assistant editor. Ben Dunson's the head editor. He's the head honcho.
Okay.
I find your work
Josh
extremely
Abbott is there.
helpful.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I really do, because I don't think there's a lot of places where people are actually doing a lot of that heavy labor to find out what the American history is, and it's deep in there, and it's not easy to find, and you're finding it and digging it out for us.
Yeah, I think we know next to nothing in a true way about the period. So, there's been the past 20 years, this sort of ressourcement effort with Reformed theology, right, which is really great. We're just now starting to get around to source material from those efforts, a lot of it translation, that have anything to do with these topics, which is great. Everyone should read Mosaic Polity from Junius, which, by the way, so Junius single-handedly destroys theonomy before it ever exists. Anyway, you guys can go read that.
He's dead now, right?
He's long dead.
He's theonomist
now. Okay, that's good. That's good. All right, so, but some of these books, Matthew Hale's Law of Nature. That's another one. I mean, people should go read these. They're very helpful.
Matthew Hale's
Law of Nature. So we're getting some sources back that are helpful. But as even people working in that field will say about Reformed theology, I mean, just beginning to understand the diversity of views that are acceptable within Orthodoxy, it's very new. And I would say we're in a similar exciting but poor situation in our understanding of the founding period. For some of the reasons I just laid out and more that probably aren't understood yet, we really are incapable still, I think, of stepping into those pathologies and mindsets of the time because we don't have sufficient exposure. As I said before, we read a narrow range of sources that are pretty they're self-serving in their selection for the biases of the historians using them. So I think there's a ton of work to do just in understanding what we had and how it kind of worked that can be instructive then for maybe a potential future that we could develop.
There you go.
So basically,
all right, Jared's texting us. So
what does he say?
He just said, "You guys got Timon." And I was like,
Yeah, he goes by Timon, but that's fine.
Timon, man, brother, we could have spent another 2 hours talking. There's so much I still want to talk to you about. Appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
If you're single, get married. If you're married, have you some kids. And if you have kids, go baptize them. Until tomorrow, love God with all your heart. Oh, it's Monday. Yeah, that's right. It's not tomorrow. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. I'll be here tomorrow.
Home. It's where you build your legacy, where traditions are started, seeds are planted, meals are shared, and stories are told. We are Chris and Natalie Carpenter, owners of Story Real Estate, and our team of top agents helps people find homes in Moscow, Idaho, and around the country.
Have you thought about a move? Contact us to get connected with a top agent who shares your values and puts your family first. Or reach out to us about our Moscow relocation guide.
Wherever you're looking to go, we can help you find home. Call us at Story Real Estate or visit us at storyrealestate.com and start building your legacy.
Mom always told me to be a good boy, but the world said I could be anything I wanted to be, which is great, because I want to be a problem. No, I won't dive into sex, drugs, or gender confusion. To the world, that would make me a good little boy. I will learn formal logic and adhere firmly to the concept of objective truth. I will commit myself absolutely to the authority of the Word of God and make friends with Augustine, Luther, Calvin, Chesterton, Lewis, and the U.S. Constitution. I hope to grow up and love only one woman, a woman at least as clear-thinking and rebellious in this world as I will be, who knows where true beauty lies and who will never let me stop striving to be the biggest problem I can be. I will give my life for hers and aim to have a family large enough to require specialty automobiles. We will worship in a church unashamed of the gospel and live in a community of families doing the same. I will work myself to the bone providing for my family, and I will make sure my kids all fall in love with Narnia and Middle-earth, that they will all know how to think, that evolution will make them giggle, and rainbows will make them think of Noah and his arky-arky. Like I said, I will be a problem, immune to all that is hip and trendy and now. Singing songs that are centuries old, savoring good wine and great whiskey, dancing and laughing and feasting while the enemies of God scowl and glower and shelter in place. Hey little boy, the world says, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a metastasizing cancer of conservative Christian culture, devouring Marx's impotent progressive dream and building a resurrected Western world. I want to be a stomper of stupid sandcastles, an exposer of poisonous lies. I want my life to be a monument to the triune creator God who made us all. The kind of monument you and yours will never be able to tear down. Oh, and a fireman. Thanks for asking. New St. Andrews College. Liberal arts for outlaws.
There you go.
Putting off writing that proposal again? Yeah, we've been there. Proposal writing can be tough. It takes work, and if you're not careful, you can set up your company for failure. Well, that's where we come in. Smart Pricing Table is an innovative application that focuses on, well, the pricing table. Instead of a static document and constant back and forth, our platform creates interactive proposals that empower your prospects. Not sure if something is needed? Make it optional. Have complicated services that vary? Let your customer do the work with line item upsells. Have reoccurring services? Easy peasy. With Smart Pricing Table, you can create attractive proposals quickly. And our system is built for reuse, so you can get out of that hamster wheel. Give your customers choice and close deals quickly with Smart Pricing Table.